All right. Hello, everybody. Um, Thank you for joining us today. We're here with Sean Kinghorn and Elizabeth Bagley from Project Drawdown and Intuit to talk about climate action. We also have some members of our Enactus US staff here. So we have Steve Kapler, our interim president, Sierra Peterson, one of our regional program managers, Becky Hoy, one of our regional program managers, and Tiffany Galmache Burrows, who is with Enactus US. So thank you, Sean and Elizabeth, for being here, and I'll let you take it away.
Great, Elizabeth, do you want to lead? And then I'll follow up.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name's Elizabeth. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm coming to you from Tlingit land in Southeast Alaska. It is such a pleasure to be with all of you today. And thanks so much, first of all, for leaning in and working towards climate solutions. Y'all probably hear an awful lot about doom and gloom when you think about phrases like climate change, and we are so grateful to be working alongside Intuit and Enactus to bring climate solutions to the forefront. So do y'all want me to jump in right now to a little bit of background about Project Drawdown? Great. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Thank you. Welcome to my computer, everyone. Here we go with, I'm just going to show you a few slides about what Project Drawdown is, how we think about climate solutions in this really complex space that we call home on planet Earth. So I want to start by kind of grounding us and giving us an opportunity to think about what comes to mind when you think about climate change and global warming. Now, this is a question that was actually asked of 14,000 people around the world. And when those 14,000 people answered this question, here's what they said. About 44% of those 14,000 people from all over the world talked about the outcomes of climate change, things like melting glaciers, forest fires that we're seeing all over the world, and really tragic things that are impacting people's lives every day all over the planet. About 18% of people talked about the causes of climate change, things like the burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas. But here, everybody, is where it gets interesting, right? We've got 44% talking about outcomes, 18% about causes. Only 3% of those 14,000 people from all over the world said anything about solutions. And everybody, that's where we have such an opportunity, right? We have an opportunity to step into this space of solutions and put them into place in our communities, in our universities, all across the globe, because that's what we need to do today. Now, you might be wondering, what in the world are the solutions? I don't hear about those. Well, great question. We have them, folks. That's what Project Drawdown works on. That's the organization I work for. And we have reviewed hundreds of solutions, narrowed it down to 80. I'll talk about that in just a second. And this is one of the visuals of those solutions that we've looked at. Now, they were originally published in 2017, a book called Drawdown. The most recent publication is called the Drawdown Review, and it's available for free on our website, drawdown.org. The publication is available in English, in French, and in Spanish. So please check this out. It goes into lots of details about the solutions, why they're solutions, how much greenhouse gases they can reduce or avoid with different adoption levels across the planet. So lots of great information as you start working on your projects. Now, you might wonder, well, what in the world is Drawdown? And that's one of the things that you all with your projects are working towards. Drawdown, you might recognize this curve, everybody. It's the Keeling curve. It's the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere year over year, right? So the x-axis are the years, the y-axis is concentrations of those heat trapping gases. And the moment of drawdown is right here, right? That's the moment where the heat trapping gases start increasing and start to slowly and steadily decline. And that's where your projects are driving us towards, right? Your projects are going to be working on reducing or avoiding those greenhouse gas emissions. Now, how do we get there, right? How do we get you and your projects and globally to that moment of drawdown? Well, I want to talk a little bit about the inputs and the outputs. So let's imagine that this rectangle is the atmosphere and all of the heat trapping gases that humans have put into the atmosphere year over year. We know where they come from, everybody. which means that we can turn off all of those taps. Imagine like a bathtub with 6 different faucets pouring into that bathtub. Let's start to turn those off, right? Let's turn off 25% of the water going into that bathtub from electricity, right? Let's turn off another quarter from food, agriculture, and land use, 21% from industry, 14% from transportation, 6% from buildings, and 10% from other energy related emissions. Now this, everybody, this is the global picture. This might not be what it looks like in your community. So I encourage you to do some research. For those of you in the US, the Environmental Protection Agency has more specific details, and there's lots of other resources for countries all over the world. These are global numbers. These are where this is what the atmosphere is seeing. Now, great, this is not the end of the story, which is great news. We actually have nature, and nature does a huge service and removes the carbon. This is photosynthesis in action out of the atmosphere and the oceans. So about 24% is absorbed through land-based sinks, and another 17% through coastal and ocean sinks. So this, everybody, this is what's going on. And for those of you who are doing the quick math, that leaves about 60% of those heat trapping gases in the atmosphere. And that's what's causing that thick blanket around our planet. And that's where we need to put these solutions into place as quickly, safely, and equitably as possible. So this is the problem, right? We need to make sure that we can deal with that 60% of gases remaining in the atmosphere. How do you do that? Don't worry, I've got a framework for you. Here's the framework, 3 S's for you to think about. The first S is we want to reduce the sources of those heat trapping gases. You'll notice that this top bar is the same as the sources that were going into the atmosphere, right? So we want to look for solutions that are reducing or avoiding greenhouse gas emissions or heat trapping gases related to electricity, food, agriculture, and land use, industry, transportation, and buildings. Y'all, there are so many solutions in these spaces. I can't wait to see what you come up with. We also, second S, right, reduce sources. The second S is support sinks. We want to make sure that we come up with projects that and solutions that work on supporting and enhancing what nature already does well on land, in the ocean, and through engineered sinks like biochar. And the last S is improve society. We want to make sure that we are setting society up to be able to make the transformation that's needed. So this, everybody, is it. This is the drawdown framework for climate solutions, sources, sinks, society, so many solutions within this. I invite you to check out the website drawdown.org, and in your Enactus materials, there's a great video resource called Climate Solutions 101 that dives into this entire framework to give you a better sense for what's possible, where there's still lots of room for growth and for opportunity in terms of implementing solutions. And what I really challenge you to think about is how can you find the solutions that are the best fit for your community and move them forward as quickly, safely, and equitably as possible. Thanks so much for joining this challenge, everybody.
Great, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for the intro. Hey, everybody. My name is Sean Kinghorn. I am the Global Sustainability Leader at Intuit. We are a global software company. I've been at the company for about 7.5 years, and I lead our global vision and strategy all across our buildings and data centers and everywhere else around the world, trying to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about Intuit's journey regarding sustainability and climate action, and then why did we create with Drawdown and Enactus this race for climate action. When I first started at the company, we didn't have goals, we didn't have anything set in place. And so just like every other company that is taking action around climate change, we focused on reducing our own emissions. We've done a great job over time. We've set goals and surpassed them. We're ahead of schedule compared to what climate scientists say of having to reduce emissions by 50% by 2030 and then quote unquote to zero or net zero by 2050. We just hit that 50% reduction in April of 2020, which sounds fantastic, but you have to understand the whole world has to set a science-based target, right? Reducing those emissions that fast. And so if companies only focus on their own four walls and their own emissions, we are never, ever going to reach the goals we need to do to keep global warming at 1.5 degrees, which is super aggressive, which is what Drawdown's trying to push, actually getting to Drawdown, or 2 degrees or even above that. We're at 1.1 degrees Celsius now. And again, we're seeing all these different impacts around the world. It's affecting us today all around the world. And so in the fall of 2019, we stepped back. We knew we were going to be hitting these big goals early and thought to ourselves, what else can we do? What are we really good at? You know, what's our superpower? And what is the influence we have around the world? So we decided, yes, we're still going to focus on getting to zero as fast as possible, but our greatest influence and potential impact is actually completely outside the four walls of our company. And at that time, there weren't really very many companies thinking about going beyond that. They're either focused on their buildings or data centers or their supply chain. And so we just stepped back and said, you know, where can we have the biggest impact? And it was really focusing on helping our employees. We have about 11,000 employees. We have now upwards of 100 million customers around the world. And then we have a presence in communities where we have offices all around the world. And we realized focusing on those three areas, we could have the biggest impact. And so we set a goal at that time saying that we're going to set a climate positive goal. And what does that mean? It means we said we're going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions completely outside of our company, 50 times greater than our own company's footprint by 2030, right? So we're paying it forward for the planet. So what does that mean? Well, the hope is that that inspires other companies and other communities and cities and governments around the world to say, stop focusing on just your own emissions and doing less bad, but imagine a world where you're actually creating good, actually positive climate action. And so that's how finding Enactus, early on with our education team, working with Enactus, doing some challenges. Intuit's really good around innovation and understanding our customers and really solving for that. And so we found Enactus, and then we decided to partner on the Race for Climate Action. So the Race for Climate Action within our strategy, it falls under our community pillar for our climate positive goals, working with Enactus, with university students all around the world to institute climate projects, either in their own communities or other communities where they have a relationship, and trying to, as Elizabeth said, trying to either reduce or avoid greenhouse gas emissions. And so we think this is a super exciting opportunity. We're starting in year 2 soon for sign up, year 2. We have another year after that, a 3-year commitment. And we would love for anyone that's thinking about joining to sign up for the Race for Climate Action. If you haven't already, you can reach out to the Enactus team or to myself to learn more about it. And I think the last thing that I wanted to say before we go into Q&A is, you know, think about what your team is really good at. So I always talk about that as your superpower, right? It could be engineering, it could be communications, it could be chemistry, it could be all these different subjects. Any subject that you're studying in school can relate back to climate action, right? And then what are you most passionate about? Maybe it's art, maybe it's something else. So if you can combine that superpower with your passion, is relevant to this race. The other thing I wanted to add is, I think the environmental field has done a disservice over time when sustainability and the environment has been in its own little silo, and then people focused on social inequalities and economic development have been focusing in a different area. So if you're excited or passionate about things in your community that focus on social or racial inequalities, I guarantee you that ladders back in some way to climate action. They're completely interchanged. And so super excited to be on this call. Hope that you can all join the Race for Climate Action. And I will give it back to Hannah.
Thank you guys so much. Angela, do you have any questions about climate action or what your team can do?
Not right now.
Okay.
Yeah, not right now, but that's something definitely to think about. I mean, where we're at is in the middle of chicken ranching country. and processing, which I can imagine would, looking at ways to reduce some of the issues there, maybe a potential project. And definitely the smell. Ooh, no.
Absolutely.
Hannah, I actually have a question after listening. I'd love to pose out. I think there's several things I heard that are just fascinating here, and I know that our teams are working on, and so I'm glad to hear as we get through there. I'm just curious, as from both of your perspectives, are the individual approaches the things that'll get us to that tipping point, or is this more of a systemic issue that we've got to look at?
I will answer that first, and I'll let the expert from Drawdown probably say a much more intelligent answer. It's everything, right? So right now there's two camps of saying it's got to be only systemic change. The big fossil fuel oil companies are having people focus on their individual impacts, and vice versa. I think everything has to change, right? The entire economy has to change. And so, the pushback about individual action doesn't matter. Well, we live in communities and we live in countries and we vote and we buy things every day. And so our power as a consumer or a customer is meaningful. So even though, an X% of greenhouse gas emissions is coming from fossil fuel production, they're producing that for goods and services for us. So I try not to get in the middle of individual action versus systemic. We have to do all of it. And so I think that battle between the two is creating inaction, where especially youth today have a huge voice and they can just step up and say, this just has to change. And there's many ways that they can show up like that.
Well said, Sean, and I'll underscore a number of things that you spoke about with Intuit's focus, as well as answering Steve's question, just the importance of figuring out your superpower, right? Like the last thing we need is for people to feel paralyzed and feel like they can't actually contribute to solving the climate crisis because we don't feel welcomed or we don't feel like we have the right skills. Guess what, everybody? Every job is a climate job now, right? Like we need everybody, and it's not, is it individual action versus systemic action? It's a yes and issue, right? Like we need all of us to step up and step in our unique ways. And that's why I so appreciate Sean and the work they do to really help people uncover their superpowers, right? To help small business owners bring their dreams to life. And maybe you are a business student, right? Maybe you're working on your MBA. That doesn't mean that you can't intertwine sustainability and climate solutions into your work, right? As you hire a procurement manager, how do you want that person to see the world, right? Do you want your procurement manager to think about the value, the life cycle analysis of the products that you bring into your company, right? We want to make sure that everyone has a lens for climate solutions and specifically for solutions, right? Making the world better in whatever job they're doing. Now, working, there are so many leverage points. We could talk about it as levels of agency at Project Drawdown, where we can work from the home, the community, and larger, and keep going out to international work. But we need to be able to see, some solutions working locally often for that ripple effect to happen. So there's a great organization, actually, if y'all are interested in learning more, called Change X. And Change X takes ideas from people in communities around the world, and it creates a blueprint of how they do their work. So for example, if you wanted to work on, this probably wouldn't be the best fit for the Race for Climate Action, but for example, a community fridge to help reduce food waste in a community, right? I don't want to have to figure out how to do that. Somebody else has already figured out how to do that. I want to take their great idea and implement it in my community, right? So one of the things that I'd encourage you all to do is to not think that you have to come up with the best new wheel ever. There are a lot of awesome wheels that already work. So go ahead and spend that time doing a landscape review, doing your literature reviews, right? Figuring out, talking to people about what's needed, what's out there, and what value you can add, so that you can really move those solutions forward much more quickly, safely, and equitably.
And Elizabeth, I was going to just add one more thing, and Steve, just to talk about the power of cumulative impact. It is enormous, and I'll say two things. One is, we've kind of done the math on if 1% of our customers around the globe, we can help reduce their emissions by half, right? That actual impact would be about 1,000 times greater in a single year than the footprint of our own company. So just based on cumulative impact. And then the second is in year one of the Race for Climate Action, the different teams around the world reduced or avoided about 25,000 metric tons of greenhouse gases. That's larger than Intuit's entire global footprint, right, in a single year. So every project matters, but that cumulative impact, adding that up, of students doing this around the world is just absolutely enormous. I mean, I couldn't be more proud of, in a single year, those students reduced or avoided the footprint larger than a Fortune 500 company. I mean, that's astounding to me.
And that was kind of where I was going to follow up as well, Sean. I've always thought the beauty of Enactus is the fact that teams can identify the need in their community, and then they create the problem or the solution to address that. I think Elizabeth's point that you don't have to come up with a brand new solution is valuable to our teams, because they are often, I think, hindered by the fact that they think they have to come up with something new. I know you also read all of the entries that came in for the race, Sean. I would love to hear your thoughts on the type of projects that you saw. Sometimes our teams aren't quite sure where to get started. I know, you mentioned biochar, Elizabeth. There's definitely biochar projects that were submitted, stubble burning, that happens everywhere. So I would love to hear your thoughts on, I don't want to say your favorite projects, just because we haven't concluded year one and the final judging yet. However, just some thoughts of what our actions our teams could take.
Yeah, and I'll let Elizabeth jump in too, but I love the projects that have multiple co-benefits, right? So as an example of, biochar, right? So people all around the world are cutting down forests, right, for cooking, right? They have to, there's a bunch of different problems around that. Women and kids going and walking for miles to collect firewood, which can be dangerous. Kids are out of school, plus it's cutting down forests. The smoke burns really dirty. It's millions of people die every year based on indoor air quality, based on so one is deforestation is helping cause climate change, right? But the core root of the problem of these inefficient cook stoves has multiple negative community and family impacts, right? So projects that can kind of marry those two together are super powerful, and biochar is one of those solutions that reduces, deforestation. It also cleans better, and it also can be used as a soil amendment, which actually helps crops grow better, right? That is like a win-win-win. And there's tons of different projects like that. But I think if you can focus on projects that have a positive climate impact, but they're also solving some sort of a societal issue, those are the ones that really can scale, because lots of people aren't going to change behavior based on, hey, well, it's just good for the planet. But if you're solving a real problem in a community and the co-benefit is the planet, those are the ones that have huge ability to scale and have a massive impact.
That's such a great point that I don't think, we talk about that a little bit in the Climate Solutions 101 videos that y'all will have access to. And, they're free online on YouTube, but I love it that they're in the Enactus portal for y'all to explore there. And the co-benefits are so important, right? I think when we think about the projects that I get the most excited about, I start with a couple things. One is, does the project reduce or avoid greenhouse gas emissions, right? Those heat trapping gases, that's what's going to make it a climate solution, right? And that's what this race is really about, right? So there are lots of really important environmental projects that our communities likely need that maybe aren't climate solutions, and that's okay, right? Maybe that are not a great fit for the Race for Climate Action, but they're important to do anyway, right? Things like a beach cleanup, really great for you to do that. That has lots of benefits, not necessarily though reducing or avoiding those heat trapping gas emissions, right? So I think one recommendation I would give you all is that when you are thinking about your project, go back to the project drawdown framework that I shared. Again, it's in your Enactus portal. It's on our website, drawdown.org, to really think about, okay, is this project going to reduce or avoid those greenhouse gas emissions? And as you're doing that, I'd also encourage you to think about what Sean's bringing up. What are the co-benefits? Another great example is clean cook stoves, right? Clean cook stoves are also human health solutions because you're not breathing the toxic air by cooking in a home, right? By using and having all of the respiratory problems, right? So a climate solution plus a human health solution, win-win all around, right? So the more you can look for those co-benefits, the better. I would start with, does it reduce or avoid heat trapping gases? And what are the co-benefits? And another thing I would recommend that I get really excited about when I read your projects is collaboration, right? We should not feel like we have to do this alone. We should not feel like the weight of the world is on our shoulders. We are all in this together. We all get to write the next chapter of life on Earth together. And so learning about the partnerships that you all are creating is so exciting to me, because I can't come into your community and forge the kinds of partnerships that you can as members of your community, right? So really use that superpower that you live in a community and have connections with people that are really going to help you move those climate solutions into place more quickly, safely, and equitably, right? So leverage your community and your connections, reduce or avoid heat trapping gases, and work towards co-benefits.
Thank you.
I have a question that I'll pop in with for Elizabeth and Sean. Just as we think about moving towards, during COVID, we realized that we do not have the food supply in America that maybe we need. So teams decided to go more towards the slow food movement and working, on growing crops and stuff. But then we see from a climate perspective that it's, large agriculture is 25% of that. So what can teams do as they start phasing their projects to A, fulfill that societal need, and then B, also, not put any more damage into the climate? How can they do that? What can they do in those scaled projects that reduces and makes positive climate action while also solving that specific climate need?
Yeah, Elizabeth, if you want to answer that one, and then I'll actually add some value on maybe the reducing food waste piece.
I'm going to show a picture, folks, because this is, I think, going to be really helpful. What you can find, okay, let's see. There we go. All right, everybody see food, agriculture, and land use? For each of the sectors that I mentioned, so Ray, we talked about sources, sinks, and society. Food, agriculture, and land use is what Sierra was mentioning. About a quarter of our global emissions come from the ways we use and produce food across the world. And what you see here is what we lovingly call a bubble diagram. And these bubbles are based in in solid data. You can explore a whole lot more about this in the drawdown review. Again, it's free on our website, drawdown.org. I think it's also in your portal. But what you see here is you see different size bubbles in different clusters. Okay, so let me just explain what you're going to be seeing here. The bigger the bubble, the larger the potential impact at the global scale. Now, bigger doesn't mean better, and bigger doesn't mean you should only look for the big bubbles, because what's really important when we think about the climate crisis is that there's not one perfect solution. Now, I know your solution is going to be amazing and have great impact, so please bring that forward and let's scale that. And we need everybody. That's another great thing about this race, that we've got loads of people from all over the world stepping up to get the right solutions into place in our communities. So the way we talk about it is it's really a mosaic of solutions, and we need all of them implemented. We don't just need one, we need all of them. So with food, agriculture, and land use, we're looking at 3 main clusters of solutions. One of them, and Sean will talk more about this, one of them focuses on addressing food waste and diets, right? Reducing food waste, which is kind of honestly the world's dumbest problem, right? Why do we waste food when it uses lots of resources? Let's not do that anymore. The second area, really having more plant forward diets, right? Thinking about plants first, animals second, especially animals that release a lot of heat trapping gases in their digestion, like cattle. We also want to think about another cluster, which is shifting agricultural practices. And you could see a lot of different solutions in there. Something that people that y'all might want to consider is just nutrient management. Now, what does that mean? That means that for a lot of farmers, and I grew up on a sheep farm in rural Wisconsin, and my dad was really kind of a Renaissance man, thinking 300 years in the future. So he wasn't doing what a lot of our neighbors were doing, which was broad scale application of fertilizer across all the fields, the same amount, without thinking about what the soil and the plants actually needed, right? What that ends up doing is it ends up with a lot of it running off because the soil doesn't need as much fertilizer as is often applied on fields, especially in places like the United States. And that ends up polluting our water, which ends up with lots of cascading challenges. So when we think about nutrient management, that means putting the right amount of nutrients in the right place at the right time for the right crop, right? Just being more thoughtful and more scientific about it. And that looks different for, every crop in every field. And so there are some companies out there that are trying to automate that. If you can come up with some ways for your local community, that would be amazing, right? So nutrient management is huge. We think about conservation agriculture. How do we, sorry, I'm trying to look a little more carefully to read it. It's a little smaller here. We think about forest protection, grassland protection. There's so many different approaches to farming and to stewarding the land that could be part of a project that you work on. Now, getting back to the size, you'll notice that there are 2 shades of green. Sean mentioned earlier that when we model the potential avoidance or reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, we model both a 1.5 degrees Celsius and 2 degrees Celsius targets for drawdown. So that's why you see 2 different shades. So a lot more details in the drawdown review. But to get back to Sierra's initial question, Sierra, there are so many ways that we can focus on agricultural solutions. That's just food, agriculture, and land use. And I don't actually have it handy in this deck, but if we look at land sinks, there are a lot of other ways to use agriculture to do more good rather than just less harm.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add, and I'll just be very brief, is again, it was such an interesting problem during COVID on multiple levels, where farmers are producing a certain amount of food, they actually can't get it to market because a lot of markets were closing, and so food was rotting in the fields. People were just dumping their food. You saw all these different videos and clips of food just being wasted on an enormous scale. That's prior to all the data of showing how much food is wasted before it even gets to the market or gets into your home. And so one of the things that Intuit is looking to partner with different organizations is how do you, and also, a lot of people really struggled during COVID that were that had health issues, and there was fear about going to food banks, right? So we worked with a couple different food waste partners on how do you solve food insecurity during the time of COVID, but the co-benefit is reducing food waste, which is then a climate solution. So again, I think if you have a broader scope of what you're trying to solve for as a project, solving food insecurity, and then solving for food surplus that might have got wasted or gone to a landfill, right? If it goes to a landfill, that creates methane. That's a greenhouse gas. And so again, there's just so many clever ways to think about how to solve a societal problem that's also solving for climate change. And those types of projects are endless.
I have one kind of follow-up to that, and actually maybe even to the first question. Sean, one of the things you mentioned in your opening was around economies, and that things need to change. And I think of that in the transportation, where the oil industry and gas lobby has certainly made it hard to make changes towards electric cars and the like. And there, in any industry you can find that. We just talked about it in the food industry. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, and using sort of drawdown or tipping point, are we heading in the right direction and seeing some of these economies at a scale level change, or does more need to happen relative to that, even in awareness and our ability to make that change?
I'll let Elizabeth jump in on the scale. My personal viewpoint is no one's moving fast enough. And so that's why Intuit literally set a climate positive goal. It's supposed to inspire others around the world to say, no one is moving fast enough when everyone's just focused on reducing their own emissions. Again, back to that point in the fall of 2019, I was going to be attending a conference hosted by the United Nations because Intuit was going to be recognized as one of 87 companies in the world that had set and had verified a science-based target, right? So they were going to celebrate that. And that was the impetus to set our climate positive goal, because if only 87 companies in the world have a verified target that's based on science, we're in big trouble, right? So when I think about a science-based target, if you want to show up as a sustainable city or a government or a company, setting a science-based target is the floor to have a seat at the table, right? And so I don't think anyone's moving fast enough. I think everyone needs to move faster, and everyone needs to think about, again, it's based on how can you solve community needs through innovative solutions. I mean, one of the things you talked about for transportation and mobility, I think electric cars are going to take off fairly fast. They also create a footprint, although much less than a fossil fuel car. One of the things that we're really interested in and we're exploring is how to help our customers, small business or otherwise, use micromobility, whether it's their employees getting to work or doing deliveries in downtowns, of using electric bikes or electric cargo bikes as an example to, it costs less for their employees to get to work. It makes them more healthy. They're doing deliveries around the town. It's less overhead for the company. Oh, and by the way, it's not, spewing, greenhouse gases out of the tailpipe of a car. So thinking about how do you create a solution within that community or within that company, and then the co-benefit is there's less traffic, right? There's less sitting, being unproductive, trying to get to work, and it's reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
I think that the answer is no, we're not moving fast enough. And the answer is that we need everybody. I mean, I think the unfortunate parallel to COVID is that, right, we know what needs to be done to curb the spread of COVID, and we're still seeing individuals not doing what needs to be done, right? And that with climate change, that's the part that keeps me up at night, right? Where I'm like, we know what the solutions are, right? That's what we do at Project Drawdown. Like, we know what the solutions are. We just need people to start to put them into place. And that's why something like the Race for Climate Action is so important, because you all can start being the ambassadors in your communities, right? What so often turns the tide in this space is a trusted messenger, right? Even just using COVID again as an example, the public health people in local communities who could target the messages to their audiences, those are the heroes, right? Among many other heroes in this space, but the people who know their community, who can say, oh, you know what? In Alaska, we actually want to show the number of fish apart from each other, or, like thinking about ways to really relate to the community in a way that's going to inspire people to act. And that's what we need all of you to do. We need all of you to understand your community, to understand what solutions are going to have those co-benefits and are going to be great fits, and to put them into place, as quickly, as safely, and as equitably as possible. And not to think that you need to become a climate scientist to do this. We actually don't necessarily need you to be a climate scientist. We've got lots of them who are doing great work. We need every job to be a climate job, right? We need the marketers to make sure that when they're creating ads, they're showing people driving electric cars or using micromobility, to use Sean's example, rather than using an internal combustion engine car, right? We want to shift culture to show what kind of world we all deserve to live in, right? A world that is climate positive, that isn't suffering from all of the challenges of the climate crisis. So, regardless of what your passion is, what your superpower is, how can you weave climate solutions into what you're already doing, and how can you use that to be a trusted messenger within your community to really make change happen?
The other thing, Steve, that I would add is, and Elizabeth and Sheila know this, is that I'm always wildly optimistic because I'm in this space and I'm very passionate about it. But I'm very pessimistic to think that government in the US or governments just around the world are going to snap their fingers and say, you know what, we're going to set this goal and we're going to pull it off. Right? That's typically based on a political cycle. I call it a roller coaster. So me personally, and at Intuit and at Drawdown and others, we just don't want to sit back and wait for others to solve it. And that's the beauty of, this race, is students can go out and do projects that have a massive impact around the world that actually help those communities too, without waiting for help from others. We can just go do it. And I think that inspires others to say, okay, we're not going to just sit back and wait for someone else to figure it out. We can do this, and it makes our communities better.
Yeah, it's interesting. A good friend of mine I work with always used to say that you don't need to have a title or be in a role of leadership to be a leader. And I think there's plenty of opportunities for Enactus students around the U.S. and around the country to be leaders in this and really set the right tone.
I know we're coming up on the end of our hour. I just had one last question to maybe leave us with a message. I know one of the things that a lot of people are kind of working against when they get into climate change is this message that it's too little too late. Climate change is here, the climate crisis is happening, and now it's that paralyzing fear. What do you do when it's already here, it's already happening? And how do we stop that boulder from rolling down the hill and gaining momentum? So what would you say to that message, and how can our students really get ahead of that?
I'll start, probably not eloquently, and then I'll let Elizabeth finish because she's a much better speaker than I am. So I have identical twin 11-year-old boys. So I have this conversation all the time about what their dad does every single day. So I say, everyone matters and everything matters. Every action matters every single day. You as an individual or a team or a school make decisions every single day that can impact the future of our planet. Right? So climate change is already happening, right? We've already hit 1.1 degrees Celsius. We're on a trajectory to go above 2 degrees Celsius. So yeah, that's bad. But if you sit there and you feel paralyzed, it's going to get even worse. So that's the whole point of Drawdown, is they've mapped existing solutions already in the world to get us to that point where, greenhouse gases actually start getting drawn back down, start lowering by, reducing the sources and then helping the sinks. And so that's the path, right? That's the journey everyone has to take. And all these different students that are part of this can be a part of the solution, right? And doing all these amazing projects. But, I just don't personally accept saying, well, it's going to be so bad already, and my little action, is it going to matter? Right? That's how we got in this mess in the first place. And every one of these teams can be a climate hero and a champion at all these different scales. So my viewpoint is we have to go for it. There's no other choice. And I think if we take all these actions, it makes our communities and our society better. All the things you might care about in, all the different things about, societal inequalities or racial inequality, all these different things you might care about, that improves all of that, plus is helping solve climate change.
I love that, Sean. And I think I'm going to send a shout out to a couple podcasts that do a really great job of answering this question. And I'm going to steal some of their ideas. 2 podcasts I want to plug. One is Dr. Ayanna Johnson and oh my gosh, I'm just forgetting her co-host. Alex Bloomberg. Their podcast is How to Save a Planet. And that's the first one I'm going to mention. And what I want to mention about that one is they did an episode back in March of this year called Is Your Carbon Footprint BS? And I'm going to put that in the chat just so that the Enactus folks can potentially share that with y'all at some point. Thanks so much for nodding, Sierra. And what they said was, you know what? And I know Sean and I get asked this all the time, what should I do, right? What is the one thing? Now, there is no one thing that is blanket what everyone should do, right? But here's a great next step, right? And Dr. Ayanna Johnson said, you know what? Create a Venn diagram. So that's those 3, it's really hard to do that air drawing. Where's my whiteboard? But the 3 intersecting circles, right? And in one circle, write what brings you joy. Because if you don't have joy in your work, you're going to burn out and be no good to anyone, including yourself, right? Like we know, especially in climate work, it can take a lot out of us. So making sure that we find joy in what we're doing is so important, right? So what brings you joy? The second question to ask yourself, and that in another one of those circles, is what's the work that needs doing? And that's where Project Drawdown can help in terms of helping you explore the various solutions that are already out there, right? So what's some of the work that needs doing in your community, right? Where can you step in and help with solutions? So it's what brings you joy? What's the work that needs doing? And then the third circle is what are you good at? Right? What do you like to do? Because if you don't like doing it, you're not going to do it. It's going to be a pain to get out of bed in the morning, right? Make it joyful, make it something you want to do, and make it something that the world needs, right? And at that intersection, that's where you can find your next step, right? That's where you can figure out what you want to do, but make it personalized to you so that you feel that fulfillment. So highly recommend How to Save a Planet, specifically that episode about is your carbon footprint BS. The other podcast I recommend is called A Matter of Degrees. And that is from Dr. Leah Stokes and Dr. Catherine Wilkinson. They are just so fabulous. I'm going to put that in the chat also for the Enactus folks to share with y'all. And they really tell stories about the powerful forces behind climate change and the tools that we have to fix it. So as y'all are thinking about different projects, I highly recommend tuning into some of their episodes to learn more about the people they're talking to, because there's a diverse group of really amazing people around the world who they're interviewing, and how those people are stepping into the climate solution space, because we need all of you to join us. And we're so excited that you are going to start working on the Race for Climate Action.
Thank you guys so much, Sean and Elizabeth, for your time. This has been really informative, and it's going to be a great resource for our students to continually look back on and get ideas and get motivated and energized about taking some climate action. I'm going to pass it back over to Steve or Sierra and see if they have any closing thoughts.
Just again, thank you guys. Wonderful presentation, and certainly gave the opportunity for students to understand what paths they can take, how they can do this, and how they can do it as a community. I especially love bringing that part in, because we look at it and Enactus as our own community that's working to help. So thank you so much. Thanks to Intuit, thanks to Project Drawdown, and we look forward to doing more with you in the future.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sean and Elizabeth. We really appreciate you taking the time today to meet with us, meet with our students, and chat through this process as we build a more sustainable and a better world for all of us and our students as we go forward. So thank you for joining.